Most people are taught to look for power in the wrong places. They're told power lives in titles, in offices, in institutions, in the hands of people at the top. So when those people refuse to act, the conclusion feels obvious. We don't have power, we're not in charge, we can't change anything. But that misunderstanding is doing a lot of quiet work. Power is not something you possess. It's something that exists between people. It shows up in relationships, in dependencies, in who needs whom to keep things running. A CEO only has power if workers show up. A landlord only has power if rent keeps coming in. A politician only has power if systems remain stable enough to govern. When those relationships shift, power shifts with them. That's why positions look powerful until the conditions that support them break. This is where movements get misdirected. When people think power is positional, they focus on access, getting closer to decision makers, being included, being recognized. But access doesn't equal leverage. Leverage comes from understanding what other people rely on, what they can't function without, and what happens when that flow is interrupted. Power doesn't respond to opinion, it responds to risk. Once you stop treating power like a thing someone owns and start seeing it as a set of relationships, a lot of confusion clears. You stop asking, who's in charge? And start asking, what breaks if we stop cooperating? That question is uncomfortable, but it's also clarifying. Because power literacy isn't about feeling empowered. It's about seeing clearly where pressure actually travels and why some actions land while others disappear without a trace. When people hear that power is relational, they often nod and then still look in the same old places. They keep watching institutions. They keep tracking leaders. They keep waiting for permission. Because it's hard to accept what this actually implies. If power lives in relationships, then it depends on cooperation, work, consumption, compliance, legitimacy. Systems don't run because everyone agrees with them. They run because enough people keep participating even when it no longer serves them. That participation isn't random. It's organized around necessity. People need paychecks, housing, healthcare, safety, stability. Power doesn't create those needs. It uses them. This is why disruption matters so much and why it's misunderstood. Disruption isn't about noise. It's about interrupting relationships that power relies on. When people stop working, stop paying, stop complying, or stop legitimizing decisions, relationships strain. And when enough strain appears in the same place at the same time, power reacts. Not out of persuasion, out of necessity. This is also why isolated acts rarely move anything. Individual refusal is absorbable. Collective refusal changes the math. Once you see participation as the engine, the story shifts. Power stops looking like a wall and starts looking like a web. And webs hold until enough strands are pulled at once. The work isn't convincing power it's wrong. It's coordinating pressure where cooperation has been taken for granted. That's the difference between frustration and leverage. People often ask why so many protests feel powerful in the moment and then disappear, why crowds gather, why signs are made, why energy peaks, and why nothing changes afterward. The answer usually isn't commitment, it's structure, fire. Protest is expressive. It signals dissent. It shows numbers. It can shift public conversation. Organizing is different. It's relational. It builds alignment over time. It turns shared conditions into coordinated action. Movement building goes further. It creates continuity, leadership beyond personalities, decision-making that survives conflict, pressure that doesn't vanish when attention moves on. Each has a role, but they are not interchangeable. This is where a lot of people get set up to feel like failures. They protest and expect results that only organizing can deliver. They organize briefly and expect outcomes that require movement scale structure. They mistake visibility for leverage and momentum for durability. Power is rarely threatened by expression alone. It learns to wait it out. What it responds to is organized disruption that can be sustained, escalated, and directed. That requires planning, roles, trust, and a shared understanding of what comes next. Understanding the difference between protest, organizing, and movement building isn't about hierarchy. It's about function. Each answers a different question. The protest says this is not okay. Organizing asks who can act together. Movement building answers how do we keep going long enough to win? Without that clarity, people burn energy and blame themselves when it runs out. With it, effort stops leaking, and that's the shift power literacy makes possible. Not louder resistance, but resistance that knows how to last. People are more informed than ever. They know the statistics, they've seen the footage, they understand the patterns, they can name the harm, and still very little changes. That gap isn't accidental. Awareness feels like action because it uses the same emotional circuits: outrage, recognition, relief at finally having language. But systems don't respond to knowledge, they respond to pressure. Information can expose a problem. It cannot force a decision. It cannot change incentives. It cannot interrupt profit, control, or routine on its own. That's why so much energy gets trapped at the level of education. People keep explaining the same harms to audiences that already agree, while the structures causing those harms continue uninterrupted. Power is not confused, it's comfortable. This is one of the most effective traps of modern activism. If awareness were enough, things would have shifted already. But awareness without leverage often functions as a release valve. People feel seen, they feel informed, they feel morally aligned, and then they return to lives shaped by the same conditions, because nothing required the system to respond. This isn't a failure of caring, it's a mismatch of tools. Knowledge prepares people, it does not move institutions. Understanding this changes what comes next. The goal stops being to wake people up and starts being to organize what they already know. Shared understanding becomes a starting point, not an end point. Because once people see clearly, the real question isn't how do we spread this information? It's what do we do together that makes ignoring us impossible? That's where power literacy closes and skill building begins. Once you understand how power actually works, something shifts quietly. The problem stops feeling abstract, and it stops feeling personal. You're no longer asking why people won't listen. You're asking what conditions make listening unavoidable. Power literacy doesn't give you answers. It gives you orientation. It shows you why exhaustion is useful to the system, why awareness stalls, why expression gets absorbed, why pressure only matters when it's coordinated. It also explains why so many people feel stuck, not because they lack courage or care, but because they were never taught how power moves in real life. That gap isn't a moral failure. It's a skills gap. Once you see that, the work changes. You stop trying to do everything. You stop chasing attention. You stop measuring success by visibility or agreement. Instead, you start asking practical questions. Where is pressure possible? Who shares the same conditions? What can actually move if we act together? These aren't ideological questions. They're operational ones, and they're learnable. This is where we shift from understanding to building, not slogans, not awareness campaigns, not individual burnout disguised as commitment. Skills, structures, decisions that compound instead of disappear. What's something you used to think would change systems, but now see doesn't? If this helped you see power more clearly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you can stay with the series. New videos drop Sundays at noon and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. From here on, we stop asking why systems don't change and start learning how to make them move.